Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How the Enneagram Affects Relationships with Donors and Staff, presented by Marc A. Pitman. So before we jump into this content, my name is Julia Kerrigan. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator here at Firespring. So if you're listening in now, or maybe you've been on a webinar with us before, hopefully you recognize my voice. But if this is your first webinar with us, I'd really like to welcome you and just say thank you so much for tuning in today. If you've never heard of Firespring, we are a company that provides marketing, printing, and websites to brands and nonprofits across the world, but especially in every 50 states here in the US. And we are located right in the middle. So Lincoln, Nebraska, if you've ever heard of it before, good for you. A lot of people have not. So if you're not familiar, we're located right smack dab in the middle of the country. And what we do at Firespring, so while we're a company, we work really closely with nonprofits. So we've aligned ourselves really close together. And the reason that we do this is to leverage our people, products, and profit to do more good. And so Firespring, through doing that, is a B Corporation. And a B Corp, if you are familiar, is a benefit corporation, which is a status for companies that commit themselves to being a force for social good. So we really get up every single day to give back to our community in every way that we can and use our business to promote more good in the world. And one of the ways that we do this is through our Power of Three program. So we donate 1% of our profits, 2% of our products, and 3% of our people through time and volunteering. We donate all of these back to our community. And this is just really at the heart of what we do at Firespring. So just kind of a quick orientation, a little bit about who we are as a business and who we are as a culture, just so that you have a better idea about who we are and why we're providing these webinars to you. Okay, so that's enough about us for now. So your presenter today is an international leadership coach and fundraising trainer. Marc A. Pitman helps nonprofit board members and staff get excited about asking for money. He is the founder of the Concord Leadership Group and of fundraisingcoach.com, which was recognized by The Atlantic as one of 5 philanthropic blogs that fundraisers need to read. So with a passion that's made people call him the Johnny Appleseed of fundraising, Marc believes that fundraising is all about leadership. So he's committed to making it ridiculously easy for everyone. That's board members, volunteers, and nonprofit staff to get fundraising training. So I am really thrilled that Marc is here with us again today to present another one of his amazing topics to you all. And we, of course, are so happy that you're here joining us as well. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce and turn the reins over to Marc A. Pitman. Hey, Marc, how
Well,
are you?
thank you so much, Julia. I am thrilled and I'm honored to be here, and I'm thrilled to see so many people I know in the attendees. This is like just hanging out. I wish we could actually be face to face hanging out, but I'm really glad that you have this opportunity too. Thanks for having me here.
Yes, thank you so much.
Now, I know that we're going to go into something that many people don't even know how to spell. It's called the Enneagram. But what I wanted to do is start from a common space. Then we'll go through kind of what the Enneagram is, how it might help you and help you communicate with others, but also discover things about yourself. And then we're going to do a wrap up. And for any of you that have been through Susan Stabile's trainings or others, those often take many hours. So to try to do this in 35 to 45 minutes may seem nuts, but to help us through that, we've got a picture, and it's fully licensed with Getty, don't worry, Parks and Rec characters that we will try to illustrate some of the each of the types with. So have you ever gone to a conference or seen a webinar or had an idea that you were so excited about, and you shared it with people and they didn't get it, and maybe even it made you even more angry because they were really questioning you and saying it wouldn't work without basing anything in reality? It's almost like we need some sort of decoder, some sort of translation. It's like this sign here. I don't think people meant slip and fall down carefully. I think they meant careful, don't slip and fall, or danger of falling. But things get lost in translation all the time. And this happens in human beings much more regularly than we expect, in part because we think the way that we talk is the way everybody else should. So wouldn't it be great to have a phrase book or a decoder ring? This is remember those things we used to get in the cereal boxes that you could help you send messages to your friends through that? Well, one way of looking at that is a tool called the Enneagram. Ennea means 9, gram means drawing, so it's a drawing of 9 or a figure of 9. This is you could see aspects of the Enneagram going back into ancient literature. The modern Enneagram of personality that we use is probably about 50 years old, through a gentleman named Gurdjieff, who then Claudio, Oscar Chazo and Claudio Naranjo, so from South America, put this together. And it just kind of went crazy in the 70s, and it's gone through many iterations of popularity, because for so many of us, it really kind of speaks to who we are. It gets to some of the stuff that we didn't like about ourselves, but it puts patterns, it brings to light patterns that we see ourselves operating in, and shocking clarity. It's not perfect, just like any other thing. It's not perfect. There are billions of people on the planet. How can you ever get them into 9 different category types? I understand that. But one of the things I like about this versus DISC, which I use in some others, is that there's this whole dynamism in the process. And we'll hint at that in this really brief overview today. But there's a ongoing life journey of growth. So while identifying your type, you only have one type and you stay it for your life. But your point isn't to be the best type you can be. So I'm a 7. My point in life isn't to be the best 7 I can be. The point is to identify the patterns and then release them, transcend them, and become the best human I can be, knowing that what I bring to the table are the pluses and the minuses of tendencies with the 7 pattern. And this will become clearer going forward. But one of the problems that we get into in any of these typologies is that we start just celebrating our own type. And especially if you hear your type and it makes sense and you love it, just know that that initial enthusiasm and excitement is awesome, but that's just the starting point. There's a whole journey that you can go on with this. The 9 types they've been given a lot of different labels. I've tried to choose some. Most of just so you know where I'm coming from, I was introduced to the Enneagram in the 80s, in the late 80s, by a Jesuit priest named, I'm totally blanking on his name. That's so awful. I've got some of his books here. Richard Rohr. Phew. I'm so excited to share this all with you. I forgot the seminal teacher that shared it with me. And then over the next 30 years, I use this to grow in my own personal development. But 2 or 3 years ago, I read a book by Beatrice Chestnut that called The 9 Types of Leaders, and that's in a slide on the end, that really encouraged me to think about using this with the business and nonprofit leaders that I coach on a regular basis. I've been coaching for 15 years, but I hadn't wanted to introduce the Enneagram because I just didn't know if it would be appropriate. What you can get from that story in part is that this is really good, a good thing to kind of sit with for yourself. One of the worst things that can happen after you go to an Enneagram thing is start broadcasting, oh, you're this and you're that, you're a type this, because fundamentally the Enneagram is about motivation. With DISC, if you're familiar with that, extrovert, introvert, task, people-centered typology, you can look at behaviors and indicate, yeah, you talk fast and you talk about people, so you're probably a high I. Or you seem to withdraw, you seem to be back, and you talk a lot about details, you're probably a high C. With the Enneagram, it's so different because it's not the outward manifestation of the number that matters as much as the inner motivation, the why that people are operating that way. But that's the power, and talking with donors and staff too, as you start conversing with your different type, if that's where you feel comfortable doing, not to pigeonhole people, but to figure out how to speak their dialect. So to introduce you to this, what I want to do is we'll have a slide that has the number, and then we'll talk about what their desire motivations are and what their kind of anti-desire or anti-motivation, the stuff they fear, what they're trying to avoid is, because that's just as important or even more so. And it's actually, those are the parts that make it so that many of us that have been introduced to the Enneagram discover our type because of the part, it's not necessarily a wonderful, enjoyable experience. It's because there's some of the stuff of our type. Like when I learned about my type, there's a shallowness in 7s that just jump from thing to thing and don't really commit, and unhealthy 7s or immature 7s. And I didn't want to be that. But in knowing what you don't want to be also there's a lot of growth for that too. So we talk about in growth, where the numbers move, and in stress, and when you become defensive, you move towards another number. Most of my terminology for most of the 30 years, I was always reading Hurley and Dodson and other folks, but it was mostly Riso and Hudson in the Enneagram Institute that really kind of grounded me as I kept going back to the Enneagram. I used to get a daily email from them reminding me of different things about my type, usually warnings, sometimes reminders of the good parts too. Now, the one other part of an overview, what I will do, most of the people it seems like that teach Enneagram numbers and types find it helpful to talk about the types of people that might exhibit those tendencies. That is dangerous because you're not supposed to do that, but because we only have a limited amount of time, I wanted to try that, and that's why we'll also play with the Parks and Rec, which was Ilan Ben-Ami wrote a blog post on Medium, which the link is also at the last slide in this presentation, and you will be getting a PDF of the slides after the presentation too. And then finally, we'll talk about how do we talk the dialect of that person. How do we talk our own dialect, and what are some things, if we're not communicating with somebody else, what are some things we can try to talk the dialect of that other person? So with that, let's get into the Enneagram. There are so many different ways you can split these groups of 9 into different groups of 3. And you can split each of these types into 3 types, subtypes, which Beatrice Chestnut does a really great job with. But what we're going to do for today is we're going to look at 3 intelligence centers that seem to have aspects in much of the literature, even wisdom literature and tradition going back through the centuries. I think I neglected to say this, but one of the hints of the Enneagram that we can see going back thousands of years is in Homer's Odyssey. I just finished reading a book by Michael Goldberg that goes through how every step on Homer's journey home from, on Odysseus's journey home from the war, he goes through has different encounters, and each of them work just with the same way that we present the Enneagram now, with a 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then the last stop being 1 before he gets home. The tendencies are there, and there seems to be some sort of understanding of this form of growth going back through the millennia. So what we're going to do with the 3 intelligences are there's gut intelligence people or body intelligence people. Those are the 8, 9s, and 1s. There are heart intelligence people. Those are the 2s, 3s, and 4s. And then there are head people. Those are the 5, 6s, and 7s. And as confusing as it may be, we're going to use the gut, heart, and head as our way of going through the circle. So we're going to start with number 8 in the gut center. So that's why we're not starting with number 1. The 8s are the protectors. These are the people that fill up the room. They are the most powerful of the 9 types. Their whole desire is to protect themselves and to be in control because they really don't want to be harmed or be controlled by others. They are the ones that we would most typically think of as bullies, even though that is not their motivation at all. They just know that if they can protect their space, then they can, and protect the clan around them, their tribe, their village, the people that they associate with, that is their mode of operation. That's what they desire to do. They tend to be really impulsive, black and white people, but not black and white because there's an outer reasoning for it, but just because it's subjective and internal. It's just impulsive. When they become centered in themselves and grow, they move towards the number 2, which is known as being more helpful. And they can become really open-hearted and nurturing. And when they're under stress, though, which in times of a pandemic is definitely times like that, they can move to this more secretive, kind of reclusive nature, parts of 5, and they can become really just fearful and bombastic. So you need to be careful of those. If you have a person like that I've dealt with board members like this and CEOs like this. They can be some of the best people, but they can be some of the most destructive as well. They don't really care what other people think about them or the decisions they make. They're just going to make the decisions because they've decided it's right. People that other Enneagram researchers have identified as this are probably Martin Luther King Jr., Queen Latifah seems to exhibit some of this, Winston Churchill, Pink, and then Tony Soprano and the Sopranos seems to have this sort of space-filling presence that just gravitates people to them. The Parks and Rec character, and again, this is a licensed Getty image, just in case anybody was worried about intellectual property like I am. If we were together, I would ask you, what is it, maybe you could type into the questions part. Yes, Michael Taylor, I know Richard Rohr is not a Jesuit priest, but it was Jesuit priests through Richard Rohr that taught me this. But who do you think in Parks and Rec would be the person that most exhibits 8? Somebody says Leslie. That's good. Good. I'm glad you mentioned Leslie because somebody says April. And again, this is just playful. This isn't, you know, you'll see Leslie, Donna, Ron. Okay, we're getting a lot of Donnas and Ron in April. Okay, so this is good. You guys are totally tracking with me. I appreciate this. With the one that we chose for this and that Ilan Ben-Ami chose was Donna Meagle. It's because she's got that kind of no nonsense attitude. She's not going to take crap from anyone. Her way is the way she's going to do it, and she doesn't have to prove it to anyone. It's just the way it is. We'll talk about why Leslie has similar tendencies, why Ron you might have thought of as an 8, but may fit a different type more. And April is also a unique individual too. But I'm glad you guys are playing with the questions. This is fun. If you're talking to this type of person, part of what you want to know is how is this going to protect us? Part of what their motivating factor is protection and not being taken advantage of. So if you can highlight the aspects of what the ask that you're making or the request that you're making of staff maybe, or the ask of donors, if you can highlight the parts that are going to help you or the organization stay in control or not be taken advantage of, or will be protecting the people that you serve. 8s can be really into social justice because they want to protect the most vulnerable. So that could be something that you could think about. All right. Now that we've done one, we'll go through the rest, and you've got my contact information at the beginning, and you'll have them on the slides too if you want to have more questions about that. 9s are the next number in the body type. They are usually described as he's the nicest guy you'll ever meet. These are wonderful human beings that desire inner stability and peace of mind, and they really avoid with everything they can conflict or separation. They are spending so much time moderating everybody else's well-being that they actually forget themselves. And so as they grow, they can become more towards a 3, which is, we'll see, is they become more energetic and self-developing and thinking about their own goals. But 9s are so in tune with everybody else's goals that they almost think that they're in a way. When they get under stress or in defensive, they move towards a more worrying nature, the negative tendencies of 6, and they become really hard to be around because they merge so well with everybody else that they can, if you're having a meeting with a 9 and if your CEO is a 9, everybody on your staff could leave the meeting thinking that the CEO agreed with each of them individually, even though they each had different ideas. 9s have an amazing ability to see everybody's perspective, and they won't be swayed necessarily by them, but they can understand the viewpoints and the merits. What makes this hard for 9s is that it can be very hard to prioritize when everything's coming at them. And so they'll need external systems, and part of the work for 9s is to really figure out not just they see everything that needs to be done, but they don't necessarily see that it's theirs to do. So knowing what is yours to do, but also knowing what is yours to do first. Maybe calling that donor and saying thank you is more important than organizing the Sharpies on your desk. But to a 9, it all looks equal. So that's going to be part of the work that they need help with. Possible 9s through in history and culture: Lisa Kudrow, Abraham Lincoln, Colin Powell, Mr. Rogers exhibit a lot of 9 tendencies, Marge Simpson from The Simpsons. So on Parks and Rec, let's play with this. Who do you think is a 9 out of the team on Parks and Rec? Yeah, a lot. Okay. The first person okay, Christian and Shannon, you guys nailed the one I agree with too, is Jerry. The reason for this is 9s don't tend to get picked on like Jerry does, but Jerry is so selfless and self-denying that and so not calling attention to himself that those are some of those 9 traits. And so that would be the 9 there. If you're speaking with a 9, if your CEO is a 9 or your donor, it could be a sense of harmony. Like in a time of chaos, what's staying the same? How are we making sure that everybody's needs are being heard as we take a decisive step forward? How are we going to be including as many people as possible? That may be a way of thinking about that, communicating their dialect. And the last in the body type is a reformer, the 1. The 1s are black and white, totally. It's either, if it's not right, it's wrong type people. There's no gray for them. They have this deep motivation to be good, to have integrity, because they're really afraid that they're not going to do enough, that they're not perfect, they're maybe corrupted a little bit, and they're not going to be it's going to be their fault that everything falls apart. Where 8s have a very black and white, my way or the highway type of thing, 8s are impulsive and internal, where ones are very much out. They usually have outside of themselves rules. They could be really religious, or they could have they could be very good with structures that they know that are morally right or wrong, but there's a deep moral part to them, and there's almost a resentment. A lot of ones, one of the toughest things I hear from ones is that where all of us have an inner critic, ones seem to have an inner choir of critics. They often express themselves by pointing out the problems everybody else, like you didn't do this right, you didn't do that right, without they don't have a clue that they're not being loving. They think they're really helping because they think everybody else wants to be perfect and make the world better too. And that's one of their gifts to us, is that there is we can see through them that there is a right order to things. There's a right way of doing things, where their work is that they need to learn that sometimes enough is enough. Good enough is enough to get some things done. It doesn't, not everything has to be perfect. And it can actually be driving people away when you keep pointing out all the different problems with their work. In health, ones move towards the 7 and become much more spontaneous and joyful. But in stress, they move toward a 4. They become this kind of moody, irrational, I'm the only one that cares, nobody else cares as much as me sort of kind of tape that goes on inside their head, or chorus that goes on inside. Possible ones in history and in culture: Jerry Seinfeld, maybe Sandra Day O'Connor, Spock, kind of that logical, there's no emotion, sort of cut and dry, black and white type thing. The church lady, well, isn't that special? If you remember that generation of Saturday Night Live people that my mother and I used to like. When it comes to Parks and Rec, since you guys are doing so great with the questions, who do you think the one would be here? I'm seeing a lot of Leslie's, yeah, and that's what we would that's what I would say too. Leslie is very energetic, wants everything to be right, and really takes it hard when she lets the team down or when she fails. And she's wanting to just make everything perfect, and she wants people around her to be doing right too. So there's that. I'm glad you guys this is so much fun. You guys are great. I didn't know if this would work virtually to have the playing part with this. So thanks for playing along too. This is good. So if you have a 1 in your life, and they're probably the ones that are showing you the typos, they may take your fundraising letter and say, did you notice you should have had a comma here? And the possible dialect for them is to talk about how you're going through all the steps. Like, one of the things that is good fundraising right now, and good maybe even staff management, we don't know how to go forward entirely. We don't know what the future holds, but we're taking the steps as best we can, including a step of shortcuts. There may be a time when we can't take all the steps, and that's part of the step that we're implementing. That might be able to bring them over to your side, or help them see that that you're considering you're going through the right logical process to get things done. You're not taking shortcuts just because you're slacking, but you're doing the best that is out there, and working with the best that's around. The next area, intelligence. So those are all the gut-centered people. We're going to now go to the heart-centered people, who are more emotion-centered. They process things through their emotion instead of through their bodies, and they are often looking at how do they present themselves to the world? How do others see them? The first one is the 2, the caretaker. 2s are amazing human beings that have the supernatural ability to see what other people need and fill it even before they may even need it. They have this deep-seated desire to be loved and to be appreciated, but they don't really notice that. They're more motivated out of not wanting to be unwanted, and they're afraid that they're not worthy of love. My mother was both an unhealthy and a healthy 2, and there was, when she got unhealthy, you saw the strings attached with her helping others. She helped others, and she'd, whenever she found a book that she loved, she'd buy 12 so that she could give them out without any expectation of them coming back. But she was deeply scared that nobody was going to take care of her in her time of need, because out of the 9 types on the Enneagram, only 2s can see what other people need. Everybody else has to be told what somebody needs if they don't have this ability to see it. And 2s would never think of saying what they actually need, because they have the glasses to be able to see other people's needs, so they expect everybody to see them too. In health, the self-deceptive 2s can move towards a 4 and become really nurturing and emotionally aware of their own identity, their own authenticity. But in stress, they can move towards that really impulsive 8 and become aggressively dominating. You do need this. You need my help. I will help you, and you will like it. So if you have people acting like that, they may look like Desmond Tutu or Eleanor Roosevelt, Richard Simmons or Dr. McCoy, Bones and Spock, in Star Trek. They can be they're wonderful people, and most of the time, and they're people you want to have around. They really can provide help the team quite a bit because they see things that most of us would miss. So think about Parks and Rec. Who would the 2 be? And the reason we do this, just so you know, Ann Perkins, yeah, very good. I'm just going to cut to the chase. Ann Perkins is always helping. She wants to merge with the people she's dating. I remember one of the episodes I just watched was a Halloween episode, and Ron goes and starts taking care of the stuff in Andy's house. And Anne is right there with him and gets totally into it too. She kind of loses herself in her enjoyment of support, like fixing the stuff that needs to be fixed in the house. But she's a nurse, she's a carer. She's always there helping people for all the different things, even though she doesn't even work in the Parks and Rec department. So if you're thinking about talking with the 2, a possible dialect or conversation topic would be, how will this help us help others? We can help others and we can give back to others because we're doing this. If we raise more money now, we can give back to others. If we work this way as a team, we can help more people. That could be a way for helping get the move 2s beyond the kind of, I don't understand what you're talking about, to, oh, I want to be part of what you're talking about. The next one, I know we're blowing through these, and I thank you for being here with me. There was a comment in there about how all of these characters are composites. They could be a composite of a bunch of different things for sure. That's where it doesn't help. It can be dangerous to type people, and you shouldn't do it in real life. Why I feel more comfortable doing it with fictional characters is that some authors actually use this Enneagram. There's so much flexibility and movement within the Enneagram style that they actually model their characters after that. That gives, I feel like there's a little bit more freedom with this. 3s are right in the center of the heart-centered triad. They are just amazing, like upfront, successful multitaskers. They're full of energy. They want to feel valuable. They want to look successful. They want to feel worthwhile, and they're afraid of being worthless or being a failure. So everything they do is they have this amazing ability to walk into a group and know exactly how that group measures success and to match it. The scary part for them, and I had one person come up to me after doing a training of this for nonprofits. He said, "You're totally right." I said, the scary thing for 3s is that if everybody in their family or all the different aspects of their life get together to celebrate a birthday party with them, they'd freak out because they know how to be successful at work, and they know how to be successful at their social club, and they know how to be successful in their softball league, and they know how to be successful in their faith community, and they know how to be successful in their family. But those are different aspects of themselves, and they don't know how they would present themselves together with all those different audiences in the same room. And this one really successful leader was having that same issue because he was turning 50 and he was just giggling to himself about how uncomfortable it made him feel because he knew everybody would still like him, but there was that part underneath him that he wasn't sure if they would all experience him the same way that they did when they were in their separate situations. And health and growth, the 3 that can be deceitful even because you can be trying to put on airs that maybe aren't yours, moves to a 6 and becomes really cooperative and committed and loyal to others. In stress, 3s are often they move to 9 and become really apathetic and disengaged, which can be a real warning sign if you see somebody that's really driven and good at multitasking and great at getting goals done, and just kind of check out. They could be in a lot of stress. Possible 3s throughout history and culture, Augustus Caesar, Condoleezza Rice, Muhammad Ali, Don Draper from Mad Men, and you guys I think are going to be on top of this. Who do you think the 3 would be in Parks and Rec? Kelly said it first, so I'm going to, oh yeah, a lot of you are getting it now too. Tom Haverford. He doesn't really like his government job, so he's not presenting as a 3 there. But in the same Halloween episode, you don't find out until the end that he's bankrupt, but he is pulling out all the stops. He's got these decals on the floor with his face on them. He's got his promotions company all over the place. And he even says to Leslie at one point, Leslie says, "I thought you were doing so well because you were booked for the first 2 weeks or immediately when you were open." And he said, "That was just a sales ploy. We wanted to look like there was demand. So we told everybody we were booked for the first 2 weeks." So in an unhealthy 3, there's that sense of trying to present what other people want. In a healthy 3, it's having a good sense of what people value and being able to reflect that back to them. So if you're a 3, part of the work for you to do is to try to find out what is it in you that's of value, because every human being has inestimable value, and being able to learn and trust that it unlocks a lot of gravitas and potential for 3s. If you're dealing with a 3, if you're talking with one of these fast-moving high achievers, a possible kind of way to talk to them could be, how will this help us be seen as successful? This is where you find a lot of problems with leaders and board members when fundraising, because good fundraising shows a problem and lets the donor solve the problem. It doesn't take the problem away and leaves them uncomfortable. But good leaders, a lot of leaders, especially 3s, don't want to look incompetent. They don't want to look like there's a problem. And so they remove the opportunity for the donor to become part of the solution by trying to present this weird fundraising thing that sounds like everything's okay, we're doing really great. If you could help us, it would be really helpful, but we got this. We really don't need your donation. So trying to help them, show them that this will actually help us be seen better, might be the dialect cue for them. And the last in the feeling center is the 4. And tragic romantic is one of the labels that one of the groups give. 4s are amazing people that have an ability to experience all emotions. They can experience the highs and really positive emotions, and they can experience the lows and really dark emotions. And it doesn't stick to them like a lot of the other types would. The dark or depression, those of us who aren't 4s would look at a 4 and say, you're really depressed. And they aren't. They're just hanging out in a dark area, but it's not a bad thing for them. If you're going through mourning or through a tough time, a 4 can be really helpful to have around, because they're not going to be turned off by your negative emotions. What they want is they want to be authentic. They want to have their own unique identity and to be seen for who they truly are. What they're afraid of is being ordinary or even being insignificant. So they're often, the tragic romantic part is in part because they have an amazing ability to put the spin on everything, a different spin, a unique spin. A lot of artists are stereotypically thought of as 4s because of this. In health, they move to a 1 and they learn that there are some principled, objective sort of measures to work through their life. Everything isn't just based on their own emotions and their own processing and their own trying to be unique and authentic. In stress, though, they move to this 2, which looks really weird because 2s are incredibly helpful. So this usually self-absorbed 4 will start helping others, and most of the people around them will read that as a positive thing. Susan Stabile has a good thing in her podcast on the Enneagram journey that they call it pro-social behavior, and it's really confusing, especially if you're working with a 4 and all of a sudden they start helping you really helpfully. It could be a sign that they're actually in a lot of stress. Possible 4s could be Anne Frank, Leonard Cohen, Sarah McLachlan, wonderful people who have brought out a richness and a texture to life through their sharing that we wouldn't have. Our world would be less if each of the types were not part of this, but for 4s, you can definitely see that in the way that they present. So who do you think is the 4 in Parks and Rec? Yeah, you guys are rocking it. April, for sure. And this is one of those, is April really a 4? I don't know, but she measured it. I think she created the major college of Halloween studies, and she talks about this really deep and dark things that almost tries to throw people off. And she doesn't seem to be, she just seems to be there, and it's kind of part of who she is. She's not, the depressiveness isn't attached to her or dragging her down. She's almost kind of playing with it in a way, and some of the asides that she takes to the camera. If you're talking to someone who's this way, talking about how this is really authentic, this is what's really going on, we're being authentic to the people around us, and maybe even how that authenticity will set us apart. As if you're talking about staff members, going back to the values that are 4s, going back to the values that make this organization unique and different is really important. There's less an desire to see themselves as part of everybody else. They want to see themselves how they're unique and how they're the place that they're working at is different and showing the world a different aspect of itself. And then, be sure to have your questions coming, because we're going to be landing the plane. We're going into now the head center. Again, this is a brief overview, but hopefully you'll be able to see how powerful it can be in working with staff and donors and others in your life. Head-centered people are motivated by fear underneath. Right underneath the surface of all head-centered people is just fear, whereas it's shame for the heart-centered and it's anger for the body-centered. The ways the fives deal with fear is that they just want to amass knowledge. Fives are the people that will close the door, and um, so they're not the best management by walking around type of leaders, because they really close the door and they mean it. They have this just feeling that if they want to be capable and competent, and they're really afraid of being hopeless or being incapable. So their way of situating themselves in the world is to amass as much knowledge as they can. And why it's great to have a five as a leader is because they're good at amassing knowledge. We learned with our son, and he lets us tell the story, that to ask him to write a paper or to, there's different things we'd ask him to do, and he would get upset because parents are asking him to do work. But the minute we ask, hey, could you research that for us? Boom, it was just like we talked his language. He identifies as a 5 on the Enneagram, we found out later. And research was fine for him. He loves being in that space, and he will amass that. All the, he'll go deep in subjects and really bring really good conclusions to light. The problem with fives is that they can think about all the different possibilities in their head. They can think about all the information and forget that they actually have to do something too. But in growth, the fives, they call them avaricious or greedy because it's greedy of their energy. Fives wake up in the morning with a certain amount of energy, and every unplanned interaction is a drain on that. For those of you that are raised in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the manna in the desert, they had a certain amount of manna in the day, and that was it to the end of the day. They didn't get any more to the next day. Fives go through life feeling that about their energy. And so if we work with a five, or we're talking to a five, just hanging out, just popping by the door, those are things that are actually really depleting them of energy. And it would be much more loving and caring of them and gracious to ask them to set up an appointment. And it's not that they're trying to give you a stiff hand, it's because they're trying to give you the space and the focus that you deserve. So in health, they move towards an 8 and become more decisive, self-confident. They actually take the knowledge they have and actually take action. But in stress, they become this scattered sort of hyperactive person. You know that a 5 is stressed often when they try humor, but it comes out across as biting cynicism and sarcasm, like really biting, more than what you'd see in a sitcom or something. Fives, that could be a sign that you're working with a really stressed out 5, or if you're a 5, that you're really stressed out. Albert Einstein could have been a 5, so you can see the gifts of a 5, being able to amass all this knowledge. Buddha was probably a 5. Agatha Christie was probably a 5. Emily Dickinson, Fox Mulder from the X-Files, doesn't really care what other people think about them, and they're doing a deep dive as far as they can. So knowing that, who do you think, yeah, Chris is already there. Who do you think is gonna be doing this in Parks and Rec? And there's a couple of different people that might exhibit this, but yeah, a bunch of you are saying it. Ron Swanson. He doesn't give a crap about what you think about anything. He'll close his door. He is not really interested in other people's opinion of him. And that's kind of some of those aspects of 5, or what a 5 can bring to the table. If you're talking to one, then it could help you to show how your effort, your energy, your plan is actually helping conserve resources for the organization. And making yourself less dependent on other organizations or other plans. How you're being more self-sufficient and preserving your energy, or the organization's energy. That could be a way to start learning to speak the dialect of the other person. And the center of the head triad is the 6s. The 6s are questioners. They're the loyalists. They are amazingly dutiful and solid human beings that can really drive a lot of us nuts, because their incessant desire to be safe and have security means that they can walk into, an example I learned from Susan Stabile is, they can walk into a movie theater and we're looking for our seats, and they see the exits, and they can see, okay, those are where the exits are, and they've already decided the alternate exits to the exits if anything should happen, and then they have plan B, C, and D in case an emergency should happen. An emergency doctor walking onto an airplane said that she knew right where the defibrillators were, and she was taking a kind of mental indexing of all the passengers on the plane, that to see who are the highest risk of needing medical attention, and that's just going on in their head. Their fear, what they're really afraid of, is being without support or guidance, And the way that they deal with the fears are a couple different ways. Some of them just keep questioning everything until they can be 100% certain that a pattern is the way to go, or, a set of your actions are exactly the right ones, or a person is the right person to follow, or they deal with their fear by pressing into it. So a lot of the people you see protesting at different events are probably sixes that are called counterphobic. They press right into the fear and try to face it head on. If they're afraid of jumping from cliffs, they will jump from one to see if they can trust the bungee cord. Maybe a bungee cord wouldn't be good on a cliff. I guess it's more from a different type of jumping. You can tell I don't do that. But sixes are amazing people because once you've got them once they trust you, nothing is going to sway them that you're not trustworthy. They are so loyal. So in health, a fearful six moves towards 9 and just relaxes a bit and even becomes optimistic in their outlook. And in stress and defense, a loyal, dutiful six moves toward a 3, becoming really arrogant and competitive. So when you have somebody that's asking you a lot of questions, starts becoming really arrogant and competitive in a not a healthy kind of inspiring sort of way, it might be that there's a 6 under stress there. Some possible 6s in history and in culture are Malcolm X, Bono, Meg Ryan, maybe Ellen DeGeneres, George Costanza on Seinfeld, and where you guys think the 6 might be in Parks and Rec. Yeah, yep, you guys are there are some good questions in there too, but Ben Wright is it. And it perfect with Ben is that he was a state auditor before he was introduced on the cast as an auditor. He wanted to make sure all the different possible contingency failure plans were taken into account. But he's incredibly loyal and he sticks with people to no end. That's why one of the huge gifts of a 6. If you're working with a 6 or you're trying to talk to a 6, a possible dialect thing for you might be how this is you've letting them know that you've looked at some of the exit plans and that they may even see some other problems that could occur, but these are the problems you've thought of already and why you think that you either have dealt with them in your plan or that they can be discounted based on other research. But letting them know that you're not just blindly walking into a dark cave, but you're doing things because you're thinking about the contingency plans. If you are doing planning, it can be very helpful to have a 6 there. Because they see things, they have questions that come up. Giving them the right outlet for that could be a really healthy place. If you have an advisory panel or something, it might be a place, especially if you could be one-on-one with that person. They may have some questions or some insights that will really lend to making your outreach or your work or your organization stronger. And finally, for our whirlwind tour around the Enneagram is the 7. 7s have the most energy of all types on the Enneagram. They are, always in the future. They're always planning in the future. Their way of avoiding that fear that head center types have is to be thinking about what's next, and so much so that they have a hard time celebrating the present, because they want to go on to the next new thing and learning the next new thing and doing the next shiny, exciting thing. The future is what's exciting, not the present. They have this desire to be satisfied and content, to have their needs met, because they're super afraid of being deprived. And that deprivation could also be controlled. You'll see a lot of 7s that are major gift officers because they like to be able to travel when we could. And they buck up a little bit against the reporting requirements because seems annoying and micromanaging to them. Just speaking from my own personal experience in part there, but also working with folks in this sector for about 25 years. In growth, they're gluttonous, not because they don't know when to stop, but because they're always trying to take in new experiences. What they're really good at with those experiences is being able to draw connections. So if you need an analogy or something, a 7 could be someone that would say, well, that's just like this. And they'll pull out some example that seems so out of left field, but it totally fits. In growth, they move towards that 5 where they can center and they can do a deep dive and really stay still and focus and study and become even fascinated with life instead of always looking to the next thing. In stress, they move towards that 1, which is that really black or white the hypercritical part of a 1. So if you're working with somebody who's normally very joyous and happy, 7s, I talked about 4s having the full range of emotions, 7s only have a half. When things start feeling normal and where everybody else is just breathing like, yeah, we're in a rhythm, 7s get really worried because they think that's depression. And they don't want that. They just want the high of new experiences and new people and new life and new knowledge. So in stress, if you're working with somebody who always seems to be up and positive and high and happy, when they start getting black and white with it and angry with their this is right, this is wrong, where they're drawing on is a fact that they need to know that there's right and wrong, but they can be implementing that on people in a negative way. Amelia Earhart could have been a 7. Elton John seems to exhibit some of that flamboyancy of a 7. Katy Perry, Fred Astaire. The Dalai Lama with joy is definitely seems to have 7 tendencies. John Belushi did too, with the kind of overdoing it. Enough is never enough. They want more. Who do you think they would be? And this is a trick one because they're actually 2 people. Who do you think it would be in Parks and Rec? Yeah, okay, you guys are rocking it. Andy and Chris. Chris or Andy, yeah, you guys are totally right on. So with Chris, he says he has to keep going and keep moving because despair, he doesn't want to fall into the pit of despair. And that's something that's really to the point where he is totally clueless that the relationship with Anne is over. He keeps thinking they're going to come back. And Andy Dwyer, that sort of FOMO, that not wanting to miss out. And I think it was in the first season where he does his whole bucket list. He said, oh, I love this idea of a bucket list, things I want to do before I die. I'm going to get it done today. And that's where 7s can be really, really out of touch with reality. Some things can't be done instantaneously. Some things you need to take process and have the process and honor the process through too. So if you're working with a 7, it could be helpful to figure out where are the fun points, or how are these things going to help us keep pain at bay, keep our whatever that pain might be at bay. But you could also be, this is the new things, or this is the excitement about what we're doing. Even if you're not motivated by that, a 7 might be. All right, we have just blown through the 9 types of the Enneagram at a very small level, and you are able to see different aspects of how all of this works. I'm not sure why we had the 7 again there. Sorry about that. Probably because I am one. All right. So as you go through these 9 types, now when you have an idea you're really excited about, you might take a pause and be able to see how can I shape this for somebody else in a way that even if they don't get it at first, I can communicate with them and try to get it. And this is where you can't really type people, because if you see, you might have noticed I used energetic for 3 different types, or powerful for 8s, 3s, and 7s. So people may have similar outward tendencies, but it's the inner life that gets it. But if you notice that they're really energetic, you could experiment with doing something toward an 8. And if that doesn't work, you could experiment with something towards a 3. Like for me as a 7, people often type me as a 3 because I'm goal setter, goal driven, Franklin Covey certified, degrees, and do all this other stuff. But 3s would never really want to talk about failure because that's totally the antithesis of what they're supposed to be about. For me, no problem. I'll tell you where I failed, and I will celebrate it, how bad a failure I was, what an idiot I was to do what I did. Often long times before other people in my life are ready for me to share that failure. So testing out the dialects with people can help you give you a clue. And here are some words that you'll get in your PDF too that might help you in that dialect choice. But Julia, what kind of, I know my asking people with the Parks and Rec analogy has totally filled up the question part. Were you able to glean some questions, or do other people have questions that they want in the time that we have?
Yeah, no, of course, Mark. It was kind of fun being in the questions panel. I'm a huge Parks and Rec fan, so there was a lot of
Oh,
good talk
yay.
going on in there. Yeah, but one question that's come in a couple times, just for people that are newer to the Enneagram, where can they go to kind of get started on how to take the test themselves and have their teams take the test as well?
That's wonderful. And so you'll hear this. I lean towards the teachers like Suzanne Stabile that really they're not into assessments, because one of the problems when it comes to this type, the Enneagram, is that we take other assessments and they label us and they tell us what we are. No one can tell you what motivates you. They can indicate where you might be based on certain answers. And that's why the 2 assessments that are up there, the READY and the WEPSS, are the 2 best assessments I've heard of. They each cost $10 or $12. EnneagramInstitute.com or Enneagram Spectrum, and you'll see a link to WEPSS. Why I like those is they kind of sift through the numbers, especially the ready, gives you a bunch of numbers that you might be, and then you sit with those stories and see, does this fit me? And you even may work with it for a year or so and then realize, that's not so that doesn't really fit me. The Road Back to You is a great introductory book. It is, some people in my life have said that they felt themselves best described here better than in any other book that they've read. And then the 9 Types of Leadership talks about how each of the 9 types can be good leaders. And I like how Beatrice just goes through a lot of my leadership coaching clients have really unlocked some keys, and some of the things that annoy others about their type of leadership helps them put it into perspective and see how they can change, but also how they can shape their work to be really giving the best of themselves to that work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. Another question in here that we got, she says, I see how you use this for board members or other colleagues. Do you also have some examples on how to use the Enneagram for asks for a gift?
I do. If you go to, I think it's Giving Tomorrow is the magazine, and I wrote down in there the asks for a gift. I would, especially for major gifts, I would look at the dialect things and think about what motivates this person. I had a board chair. I was working with a client whose board chair was an 8, and nobody else really understood that. But what 8s are, they'll come on really strong, but they want you to come on strong too, even if you don't agree with them. They just want to know that there's energy in the room. They love politics often because there's this spark and there's this just kind of energy with the pushback that they're getting. And if you push back hard, you've earned their respect. And so knowing a little bit about each one and thinking about what seems to motivate this person, about what aspects of our cause could do that could help you shape the ask differently, or the way you talk. If you know there are 2, they may want to talk about the people in their lives that they're helping before they get to your nonprofit. I did see a thing in here too, if I could, about the disc versus this. Sorry if I answer that.
Please, yeah.
So the way I like to talk about this in coaching is that there's a lot of different hardwiring assessments. There are the abilities hardwiring, which I use with the Highlands Ability Battery to test how you actually perform on a certain stupid tasks under time pressure. And so there's just a baseline, your performance. Then there's behavior hardwiring, which is things like the DISC, which you can look at if you're a fast talker or slow talker, if you're people-centered or task-centered. They don't overlay perfectly with the Enneagram because there can be introverted 7s and extroverted 7s. There can be introverted of any of these types and extroverted of any of these types. And so that's not a perfect overlay, but the DISC I would label that as a behavior, observable behavior-based assessment. And then the Enneagram is much more of a motivation. What's the story you're telling yourself about how you make sense of the world and your place in it? And so that's where I would say that is a little bit different. But knowing that there are 9 stories can really help you with the creativity of your communicating with other people. And I should put this in here because we're talking to nonprofits. Don't change your direct mail this way. Direct mail is a very specific, measured field. So the stuff you're learning from other people that Firespring has in, stuff you're learning from Free Review Fridays with Stephen Screen, do that stuff. Don't try to get all the different types or personality assessments in there. Try to use this more in your interpersonal and team building. I would recommend.
Fantastic. Yeah, and another question that kind of goes off a little bit of what you're talking about, they said their organization leadership has always had concerns about doing these types of questionnaires with staff because of some perceived liability with maybe judging people. Do you see this as a risk?
That's excellent. And I think I'm so glad that came up, because one of the worst things that can happen at any of these type of assessments is to say, you are this, therefore, and then label it. You walk around organizations and you see people with their different colors or shapes or letters on their door or numbers, and it can stifle the conversation. And that isn't the point of any of these. If it's done with a point of discovering who we are so we can communicate better and work more effectively as a team and help. Maybe I was working with one team where all 3 of the people thought they were 7s, and as we worked through, we had done DISC together, and that was helpful to a point, but it was the Enneagram that unlocked the team where the 3 7s, it turns out one was an 8, one was a 7, one was a 4, an extroverted 4. And so it was really helpful to have this language, because we realized that some of the work that we had been divvying up among ourselves wasn't the right work. I was one of the three. It was not the right work for each other. And so, as my friend Chris Davenport says, a weed is only a weed if it's planted in the wrong place, but it can be a glorious flower if it's planted in the right part of the garden. And so helping people plant in the right place is good. I don't know if there's liability, but I know there are some assessments people have had a very bad time because they've been told they can't apply for jobs, or they can't possibly do something because they're labeled with one label, and that would be the wrong. It's good to be concerned about taking it to your team if your team is likely to do that.
Yeah, good advice, Mark. And I'll kind of, I'd like to add in a little bit on that as well. Here at
Great.
Firespring, we use a couple of other different types of grouping. We use the Gallup Strengths Finder and the Culture Index Analysis, which are still different than the Enneagram, but they essentially give you where you lay on a scale with all of your strengths and lesser strengths. But the scale is relative to each person. And it kind of goes from the top down. I think our leadership sets a culture where these things don't define you as a person or your worthiness in a role. Instead, they act as how can we create the perfect recipe for each project that we're working on with each person involved, and what areas can we all work on with each other to kind of balance out each other's strengths. So
Well, I think the benefit, that's a great example. The benefit is it gives you a common language, so that you're talking very in a similar dialect with each other. You have a certain words that you can use with each other. And one of the things, if you really get into the Enneagram, you know that you'll find that there are subtypes for every group. Beatrice Chestnut talks about that a lot in her book, 9 Types of Leadership, where there are 3 different orientations to the world that each type has. So there could be types that are motivated by the same things, but express it in different ways also. So there's a good complexity. It's not as limiting as some of the other assessments that are out there. But I think one of the benefits of any of these assessments is if you're learning a language and trying to help grow each individual, as opposed to trying to pigeonhole them or harm their career.
yeah, absolutely. I totally agree on that one. And Megan has a good question that kind of, again, ladders up on that one. She says, what's the best way to communicate with those outside your triad? For
Hmm,
example, I'm a 2 and I struggle communicating successfully with the head/fear triad.
interesting. Boy, that's a great question, Megan, and much part of it would be to know that they're probably struggling with fear, and so there could be a 5 that doesn't want to be as connected as you as a 2. They don't want your help. A 6 may not trust your help, and a 7 may feel like there are strings attached to the help and want the freedom of not having it. So like giving a 5 their space can be helpful. And maybe identifying, this is some things I see that it could be helpful to do. And I'm assuming you're helping because you said you were 2. But also like a 7, if you get into this, and sorry for those of you that this is the first time, the arrows for like a 7 type doesn't at all go to the heart, and I believe the 2 doesn't at all go to the head. And so it's being around more and trying to do your own work, trying to grow and see what patterns are triggering you and where you can grow. Usually helps you lift off of the Enneagram, so you become not centered in your type as the best type you can be, but you become more human and more able to interact with others.
Yeah, fantastic answer, Mark. Thank you so much.
This has been a
Well,
blast and the time flew by. I'm glad everybody stayed together. Thank you, everyone.
yes, absolutely. So we're right on our hour mark, actually just a tiny bit over. So I'm just going to quickly kind of finish us out.
Great.
There's a survey that pops up at the end of the session, like we mentioned at the very beginning. So that'll pop up automatically for you all. If you could fill that out and let us know how we did today, if there's anything else that we can be doing to help you, let us know there. It takes about 30 seconds. We will send all the materials out to you this afternoon, so be on the lookout for that. I'd say we'll get it to you by the end of the day. So check that out. And again, I just want to say thank you so much, Mark, for being here today and for such a great topic. It's always an honor to have you on. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today for this last hour. It was a pleasure to have you, and I speak for everyone from Firespring. I hope we get to see you again in another webinar. Thank you.